Dom and Johnny in the morning. All right, so today's topic is the third from a trio questions from Logan. So he was asking what it means to be a master. That is an enormous question. And there's a lot of directions we could start from. So where do you want to start?
Well, I am not a master of the martial arts, unlike yourself.
All right.
So I guess I can only come at this from things I have mastered,
Mm.
like walking, eating. No, no, but at least from my perspective as someone who is chasing mastery,
Mm.
um, it just seems like a never-ending chase that gets kind of more exciting the more you go. So, like, even though, just like anything, as you get closer to, a new level of skill, there comes diminishing returns.
Mm.
And I think both the fun and frustrating part about that is that because the returns are so small and the work effort is so much larger, you're doing more and seeing less improvement. But I do think I for me, I think that's really exciting, because whenever I feel like I've stepped up, and sometimes you don't really see it happening, but all of a sudden you're just like, huh, I feel like I am better than I was, a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And that's a cool feeling, So from an under mastery perspective, someone who's chasing mastery, you know, I I can only imagine what that's like even after you attain mastery, and you're now, fighting the same fight, but to prove that you deserve mastery. So it's like you chase mastery, then you get mastery, then it's like, okay, how can I represent mastery, in the best way possible.
Yeah, I think part of what makes this question a little difficult is it's going to mean something different for everyone. So, kind of like how when someone achieves first degree black belt, it's a personal thing,
Hmm.
For a parent, a lot of the time when they see their kid get their black belt, they're not sitting there being like, oh, they're this devastating weapon. That's what I wanted for them. What they're happy about is that their kid followed through on a big commitment and they
Hmm.
stuck with something. And it gives them peace of mind that when they're confronted with challenges or obstacles in the future, those won't be the reason they quit on something. That their kid is going to follow through on things they set out to do. Really, that's like what black belt means. So, like mastery, so our instructor is Master Ken. I remember when his first few students that he trained went for fifth degree in our system, which would be when you earn mastery. Um, the phrase that got used over and over again is mastery is not a destination, it's a process, which I think
Hmm.
is what you're speaking to. And on the flip side, there is a certain point where someone has demonstrated enough commitment that they earn the title of master. But even then, Master Graposo recently said something along the lines of once you hit fifth degree in this style, it's really the kindergarten of martial arts. And he wasn't being dismissive of anyone's skill. It was more just pointing out the fact that just as achieving your first degree black belt, you kind of step through a gateway and now there's a whole new world to explore. Fifth degree is another like kind of gateway where now there's like a whole bunch of ways to explore your art and it's not the end of something. So that would be the mindset I would encourage from people.
Hmm.
There are times in the lobby where, and I'm not like blaming anyone, but it's like I hear parents explain to kids like, "Ooh, once you've mastered six combination, that's when you move on to yellow belt." And I'm like, ugh, I don't know if that would be the word that I'd use,
Yeah.
because to have mastered something almost puts in your mind that you put it behind you, that it's something you've accomplished. And mastery to me is something you continue to do. That
Hmm.
once you achieve a certain rank, well, now you have even more responsibility to live up to the meaning of that rank physically, mentally, and emotionally. And as I was thinking about this, I really like Master Grapozo's kind of three aims to developing martial arts, which is you want it to be effective, effortless, and efficient.
Hmm.
So, and I think that when you look at a master, if they've achieved mastery in something, that's kind of how you can measure it. And of course, we can broaden that definition to a lot of things that aren't martial arts related, you know. So I'm sure there are things that people can do that is effective. It works when they do it, you know. It's efficient, so they're not, you know, wasting unnecessary time or resources to accomplish it. And they make it look effortless, which is an illusion because they've put an extreme amount of effort in getting to the point that when they do it now, it's effortless,
Mm,
but there was a point where it wasn't.
yeah.
So I think if you're like kind of looking at whether or not something is in that mastery category, that's kind of a helpful lens to try to measure it through.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing because I think it's really hard for us to see in this style, like, unless you're a higher rank and have been slapped around by Master Graposo. Um, because like for the most part, like to see how effortless it is usually a painful undertaking, which is why it's kind of cool to see if you watch jujitsu practitioners, because that, being the gentle art, when you watch people who have mastered that and you feel it, you're also not getting crippled, which is nice, so
Yeah.
but you can but it's a nice, it applies directly, because if you see how effortless they are and feel how effortless they are in making you feel like a child, and then you realize that the masters in our system do the same thing. It's just a much more devastating style.
Yeah.
And we are not the gentle art. We are very, very far from it. But if you do grapple with someone who has mastered the art of grappling, whether it be wrestling or jiu-jitsu or even Mongolian wrestling, which is, a pretty interesting style.
Mm.
There's or judo. There is an effortless to it. You don't really feel like anything you do matters, and it doesn't really look like they're trying all that hard. So they won't break a sweat. They'll be smiling. Sometimes they're not even paying attention, and everything you do just seems to put yourself in a worse position.
Yeah.
So, and it's crazy. And you watch, if you ever do get the opportunity to watch someone like Master Capozzo or Master O'Brien or any of the high-ranking masters, that it is effortless. What they do is effortless. Nothing you do is going to shock them. Nothing you do is going to throw them, and everything you do puts you in a worse position.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. If you don't mind getting tagged a little bit.
Yeah, well, and I think the other thing to remember is we get an idea of what it means to be a master, but even within our art or the martial arts in general, you're not going to be perfect at everything. So, you know, there are even things Master Grapozo is still like working on, right? Like he says, like he's never done a perfect one pinion, even though he's such a proficient martial artist. I remember there was one thing where he was teaching a Tibetan crane principle, and while he was teaching, he had like a TV with a Zoom call set up so that masters that were out of state could log in and, you know, see what he was doing. And he was consulting Master O'Brien and being like, did I explain that, you know, precisely? And so I think the thing with mastery is that it's okay for there to be areas where you're not as good as other areas. That's just
Mhm.
life. So, you know, that's why I kind of laugh whenever you're like, ah, you've achieved math. It's like, well, yeah, I tested for fifth degree. But I don't want to ever come off as like, you know, all knowing or anything like that, you know?
Master
Oh my
John.
goodness. Um, but, you know, so part of that as I'm reflecting is like, what are things where I can speak from an authority with integrity? And what are things that where I'm still like, "Ah," right? I feel like if I were to put my mastery hat on in certain areas, it would be the life integration side of the art. Master Ken is much better at that than I am, but like I would accept being called a master for that, right? The five animal mindsets. So just helping people understand how the 5 animals have lessons that help you change your view of a situation and maybe give you a little bit more choice. And then I think the other thing is the kinesthetic progression of our art. Not every art in particular, not every art, but like our martial art. So like why you would teach 3 combination a certain way to a 7-year-old yellow belt, how that changes when they're a 10-year-old green belt, how that changes again when they're a 13-year-old first degree, and then as they go to like second, third degree and beyond, like how that starts to refine more and more. So
Mm.
I find that a lot of my post mastery training has been really trying to understand for myself how to become more masterful in how I move for the service of the students I know that I'm going to need to teach this stuff to eventually, because I don't really want someone to get to like 4th degree and be like, nah, just kind of wave your arms around, like so like I want to understand it for myself in service of lower ranks, so that way their journey isn't going to have as many unnecessary bumps as mine. So of course struggle is part of the journey, it's a very healthy part of the journey, but there have definitely been times where, as a martial artist, I felt a little stuck because the whoever was responsible for teaching me at the time, it was kind of obvious that they weren't very comfortable with it, but they were trying to pretend like they were. And I
Mm.
don't ever want to come off as pretending. And there have definitely been times, by the way, someone asks me a martial arts question, and my answer is I have no idea.
Mm.
Because, it's something where I've tried it, haven't mastered it, but like like you're like you said, you never stop. I think the only thing I disagree with on is the diminishing returns, in the sense that you can practice for consistency, and there have just been a lot of times I learned something kind of random and then it connects to a lot of things that I've been working on elsewhere. So in that
Mm.
sense, like sometimes, something where you feel like you're working on diminishing returns for a while, suddenly there becomes like this whole new field of possibilities because of some new information you get, either from like a new form or like a new technique or even just like a new principle that you hadn't really thought of before.
That's fair.
Well, and to be fair, sorry to interrupt, but like to be
Because I'm not a
fair,
master.
well, I'm just saying like there are some times it's like you're working on a front punch and you're working on the consistency of a principle. And so like how much growth you're getting does reduce over time because you're practicing consistency. But
Mm.
then it's like diminishing return, diminishing return, diminishing return. Someone says something at some clinic and all of a sudden you're like, a new thing to practice, and it leads to explosive growth before again diminishing return. So that is part of the
Mm.
cycle.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You said something recently, and it was referencing an anime that we both watched in the past,
Mm,
with a small plant, that wasn't, it'd been growing for a long time but hadn't really shot up yet. It was kind of puny plant, but it'd been growing its roots for so long that when something happened and all the other plants pretty much got destroyed, this one survived because its roots were so strong. I actually, I've very recently started to really enjoy gardening. I think that's what happens when you start getting old, is you just realize one day that you enjoy gardening and birds.
he's 60. My dad said he hit 60 and something flipped where he's like, oh yeah, that Oriole is really interesting.
Yeah, I was calling my wife to the window the other day. I was like, Jackie, look, a male and a female cardinal right next to each other. She's like, I don't care. But I have a jalapeno plant and 2 Anaheim chili plants, and the chilies are massive and they're all flowering, and this jalapeno plant has just been like growing so slow,
Yeah.
and it's growing, but it's growing so slow, but I know that at like one day I'm gonna come outside and it's gonna shoot up like 5 inches,
Yeah.
and that's I can only assume from what you've said that's like kind of like what you mean, right? Like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
seeing these diminishing returns, like this little like micro incremental growth, every day. But then one day the roots have become strong enough where it just shoots up a little bit.
Yep. Which kind of, I think, segues us into just an interesting lens to look at this through. So you've got effective, efficient, effortless,
Mhm.
and I do think that's a progression, right? So you got to be effective and then be a little non-efficient, but like be effective first. Then you make it efficient, and eventually it becomes effortless. The other frame I thought was interesting is something that Ken has been playing with called the 5 Fs. And the idea being that when you hit a gateway, it's a time to evaluate your training through these 5 measurements, right? So the first one, which I think we've been talking about with this whole plant analogy, is foundation.
Mm.
So your foundational mechanics, like the things that keep you safe and make things work. And then you've got fitness. So it doesn't matter how skilled a fighter you are or how much you know, if your body can't, like, if your body lacks power or lacks the endurance to last the fight, right?
Mhm.
So I see this a lot with sparring where, like, someone will be like really fast or have good targeting or something, but 30 seconds in they're winded.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how fast or skilled you are if you run out of breath right away. So yeah, and that's the thing, is there is an integrity between, one of the huge benefits of this style is the longevity and the wellness over time.
Mhm.
So we've commented before, there are other styles that might get you more effective quicker, and your lifetime in that style is shorter
Mm.
because it's riskier, so you can get hurt more often, so then you can't train and keep training. The fitness is incredibly important, and if you look at the most skilled masters in our style, they have kept up with their fitness. So, I think of like Freddie LePan, Rick O'Brien, like those dudes are cut, as the kids would say. So, and you can feel it when they hit you. So yeah, so you have
Mhm.
foundation, fitness. Another one which kind of obvious, but function. So you could have the best mechanics and the best fitness. If what you're doing is goofy and doesn't work, well, then it doesn't work.
Mm.
So functionally, how well do you know your martial arts? How do you know, instead of just doing a sequence of moves, do you know how those moves would actually work? And it's okay sometimes to practice some moves that satisfy one area and not the other. So, for example, there are certain parts of forms, and I've said before, this is my own masterly opinion that feel free to criticize me for. There are moves of certain forms where I'm like, as is, not a lot of function, but it's great for foundation. And there have been other moves where I'm like, great for function, and not the best for foundation. It's not gonna really help refine your foundation in the best way. So the next one is focus, which to me means like all the mental sides of it. And I mentioned this in like women's self-defense, where I can teach you a palm heel, I can teach you a front kick. I can probably teach you all those things in about 10 minutes. But none of it is going to matter if your nervous system locks up under pressure. So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, if you get attacked, that's going to be a highly stressful situation. So, even more so than knowing how to hit or where to hit, you have to be okay with hitting. So that mindset part is where I think a lot of martial artists get locked up. And if you can unlock that part, I think the other things can come a little bit easier.
Mm.
And then the last one is fortitude. Like, can you actually withstand the training? And I do think a lot of times, as we see black belts get higher in rank, their fortitude is the thing that actually gets tested. That, once you start there's like a certain point, you gotta get thumpy. You gotta hit each other to the ground. You gotta be okay getting tags. You gotta be okay getting power delivered into you a little bit. I do think there's a threshold where it's unreasonable. Probably don't need to practice neck breaks on each other. But like you do have to have a zone of training where you're getting thumped around a little bit if you want to be
Mhm.
effective. Um,
Not just that, if you want to protect yourself.
yeah,
There's an interesting thing that happens depending on who you're working with. A lot of times the masters assume that you know how to protect yourself at a certain point when they call you up to work with you. And if you don't lift your leg a little bit, to to yield to it, they're just gonna kick you hard enough where it happens anyways.
Yep.
Yeah, because otherwise the rest of the technique won't make sense. So yeah, yeah, protect.
Tangent off the tangent. So in the TTRPG world, when you play Dungeons and Dragons, there are like 6 main stats,
Hmm.
right? That you like kind of determine what your character can do and what they're bad at. And there's a big debate over whether Constitution should be a stat. And there
Hmm.
are a lot of new games coming out where it's not, where it's like, oh, they're basically like, oh, well, if your character's strong, of course they have good constitution. And so when I hear all these arguments, I'm like, tell me you haven't trained actual martial arts without telling me you haven't.
Yeah.
Because, like, you're right, it is very different. I've met some people that are very, very strong in their weenies. And the opposite, I've met a lot of people that have really either slighter frames or they just, for whatever reason, can't generate a lot of power, but they're tough, like physically and mentally tough. They can take a little bit of a beating, but they
Mm.
they just have a hard time being strong, right? A lot of times they
Yeah.
can be fast, but they are separate parameters that can be measured. And a lot of times they can fit into one another. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny. It almost seems like the the less weight you have and the lighter you are, the more you soar when you get hit.
Yeah.
So if I slam someone in the chest who weighs like 100 pounds, which I wouldn't because that sounds like a child. But let's say I did, and they go flying. That's one that's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt their chest, but it's gonna feel more like a push. But if I hit someone that's unyielding
Yeah.
and they don't move, the entire force I deliver is being delivered directly into their chest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I feel like the stronger person is going to take more damage
Yeah,
in
it's
this system, especially where we hit
right.
deep. Yeah.
Um, I don't know if this is still true, but I remember having a conversation with Ken where he said the archetype of a person he'd have to be in a conflict with that made him the most nervous are former athlete types that have gotten a beer belly. And the reason for that was that as a former athlete, there's a good chance they still have a good amount of muscle underneath the fat,
Mm,
but the fat does offer a layer of protection that makes it so they wouldn't go down as easily taking a shot.
mm.
So like you said, if someone has a more lean build, and you stun them in the solar plexus, yeah, they have like a lot of muscle to allow them to act, but they don't have like a layer of protection. So you can probably safely hit them in the solar plexus and let them wheeze a little bit, and that'll probably be the end of it. Someone that has a lot of protection in quotes, you could try to hit them and they might not go down because even though it gets stuck, it's in like the fat layer,
Yeah.
right? So he was just commenting that what makes him nervous about that is the fact that basically you'd either have to go something for like a forelock, like in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or you would have to like actually damage them. That you can't just knock the wind out of them and let it be that. Like you might have to go for like a joint or something skeletal that's going to disable them as opposed to incapacitating them. So
Yeah.
and incapacitate, I mean like just hurt them enough that they want to stop as opposed to like actually injuring them in the long term. So
Hmm.
I found that like a really interesting viewpoint because most of the time we're thinking of like I know a lot of masters in this style, they're not even training for people who are untrained because that's just an assumption that they can beat them. They're thinking more like if I'm against another trained fighter, how do I win the chess match of their training versus my training.
Mm.
So I thought that was an interesting layer to consider is what's the point that the fight is over. So
Yeah,
yeah.
Master Rob just said this last night. We were in a class with him, and he was talking about Master Valari, and he said that Master Valari would say if he faced an opponent that outskilled him in martial arts, he said the fight would be in the mind.
Mm,
He said he would take the fight to the mind first. And that's why like his shin kicks were always so popular because he wanted his opponent to lose focus for a fraction of a second because that's how he'd win. Because
Yeah.
he said if he knew when he was outskilled, he was like, oh, if I'm outskilled, which I couldn't imagine happened often. I mean, the man was a monster. But if he was outskilled for some reason, that's he would try and pull their focus and fight the battle in the mind first.
Well, that's actually a really interesting thing to point out. I'm editing the Eagle Monkey Insects episode right now. And just reflecting on what you said about the insects, how you don't want to be one, but sometimes you need to use them. If you have an opponent that's outskilling you, you literally bug them. So like
Mm.
it's this ability to get into their head to throw them off their rhythm.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
learned more about that too.
Oh, do
Yeah,
tell actually.
apparently this was like when he was doing this. I think the quote was, I feel bad if I speak, but that he was saying that the entirety of the insect system could be taught. He was like, I could teach you the entirety of the insect system in a day. He was like, because it's simple. He says, but I'd rather teach you how to squash it, um, because even though some of the stuff is useful, I guess this was at a time when like the Walloon Kung Fu was getting super popular.
What's that?
I don't know.
Oh.
A type of Kung Fu, I'm assuming there was animal, because apparently the insect styles we do is not northern, it's southern.
Okay. Well, I've heard of southern praying mantis before.
Mhm.
That was in our Avatar episode.
And apparently, if they got in close into grappling range, they could be devastating.
Yeah.
So, Master Valari's point was you squash them because you don't want them in that range.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was very. So I got a little bit more. I'm trying to dig away at that little piece of history right there. Very interesting stuff.
Yeah, so I think to wrap it up, some indicators that you may be touching on it are that you find what you're doing is effective, efficient, and effortless. And to get there, you have to put in effort first. And then as you evaluate your training and try to find direction of where to go in your pursuit of mastery, I think a good frame to use would be those 5 traits. So, foundation, fitness, function, focus, and fortitude. And just remember that I think mastery is not a destination, it's a process. And oftentimes, it's easier to make it impersonal and not let your ego get in the way by just noticing what others are saying about you. So when other people say, wow, that was done masterfully, use that as a clue. But I think where the terminology can become counterproductive is where you start hyping up yourself. Like when the ego gets a little too far into the way, that's when it can be easy to be led off the path. So that humility, I think, is an important part, but it also, like anything, is something you want to have in balance so that you're not self-deprecating either.
Yeah, well, I think that's the beauty of the martial arts is it's even though I think you could probably apply this to anything, I think the martial arts is just on a different level.
Yeah.
Where there is no end. It is you can continue learning and you will never run out of things to learn.
Yep.
And it's impossible to learn everything.
Dom and Johnny in the morning.